All right, so let's see. Dave Crean, sorry, at on the Facebook page. How much influence does China have on the U.S. film industry? I'm not going to read the question, rest of the question, just to pause and say all of it. I remember a few years ago how the Chinese government forced the Red Dawn remake to change the protagonist from China to North Korean-led coalition force. Does it have more of a say now since this purchase of the AMC theater chain? It's not just the AMC theater chain, David. The AMC theater chain just shows what's produced. I've covered this ground before. I don't want to spend too much time on going over stuff I've gone over frequently before, but sometimes it helps to just step back and take a look at the whole picture. Not only did we get into trouble financially, and not only did we start making bad movies, but we actually began to lose the country as a result of a very obscure piece of American history. Jeremy Boring pointed this out to me, and I thought, the second I heard it, I thought, my God, he's right. And that strange little piece of legislation was the legislation that decided that movie studios could not own their own movie theaters, that was a form of monopoly. Paramount used to make Paramount movies, and they'd own Paramount theaters, and they'd show them in Paramount theaters. And so the big brains who make up the laws said, oh, that's no good. We can't have that. So they basically legally prohibited the people that make the movies from being the same people that show the movies. And what that did was it disconnected the movie makers from the American revenue stream. No matter what they may have thought, and there were a great many communists all throughout the history of Hollywood, enormous numbers, huge numbers of just really barking mad communists. But up until that decision had been made, they had to write pro-American stuff, because if they didn't, nobody would watch it. And if nobody watched it, they'd be out of a job. So you get movies like, and I'm certainly not accusing, oh my gosh, flew right out of my head. I so hate it when that happens. Frank Capra. I'm not accusing Frank Capra of being communist by any means, but people would make Frank Capra type movies because that's what people wanted to see. And so Hollywood had to be beholden to pop culture and be respectful of Americans, because that's where the dollars were. That their hearts may have not been there. Many of them were, but many of them weren't. But that's where the dollars were, and that's what they had to produce. So along comes this decision, and it took 30 or 40 years. But basically what happened was it said, now you guys who are making movies don't have to make your money from the American public that's buying tickets in your theaters. Now you can make your money worldwide. You can do it on pre-sales, and you can sell, bits of it in Indonesia and all the rest of it, and so on. And what began to happen was sources of money began to appear that wasn't studio money. Some of these were shady, some of them weren't. Some of them were just regular investment opportunities. A lot of it was wildcatting Texas guys who decided to go for it, and all the rest of it. And so these movies began to drift away from the culture, and they started to think they could lead the culture when before all they did was follow the culture. And so you've got all these left-wingers now who've been given their heads and are able to run around and do whatever they want to, and they make more and more progressively anti-American movies. And then as the U.S. domestic box office falls and the viewership of the Academy Awards goes through the floor and all the rest of it, then they find that there are people who are willing to pay for anti-American movies, and it turns out those people are China, Russia, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Iran. $100 million or $200 or $300 million for a tentpole movie that destroys Americans' confidence in themselves, and especially if it can undo existing pride the way that The Last Jedi undid Luke Skywalker, then $300 million drop in the bucket for the Chinese. It's the best investment they could make, and that's how it happens. Eric wants to know if the studios were allowed to own the theaters again, could all that be reversed? Yes. Now you're going to say, well, how can you undo the law? But certainly it would be possible There's a procedure out there called four-walling. And four-walling is the poor man's distribution method. If you got a film that you made and you can't get a major or even a minor to distribute your film, in other words, buy it from you, show it, and keep most of the profits, virtually all of the profits, you can do something called four-walling. And Roger Corman was a master of this. Four-walling means that I've just made a movie, let's say, for $1 million, and for another $500,000, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to rent the theater. I'm going to rent the movie theater from the guy. I'm going to pay him this amount of money per day, and I'll run my movie in that theater. And I'll have to do my own advertising and all the rest of it. It's not unheard of. It's not common, but it's certainly not unheard of. I know they four-walled the Arroyo, as an example. So with very modest resources, just a couple $1 million, I could go out and make a great science fiction movie that is about nothing but people with guns trying to, take out some bad guys from other planets without the help of the government. And then for a little additional money, I could rent a number of theaters, run the movie, and do something that used to be called a platform release. It's called a platform because that's what it looked like. It looked like an Olympic platform, you kind of inverted one. You would start, you'd rent, or in the case of a distributor, you'd put a movie that you thought had some real juice to it. You'd open it in I don't know, 50 screens, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, Chicago maybe. And then you would use the money that you got from those limited releases and take that money and then release it wider. And you'd kind of it's like trying to start a fire with with a flint and tinder. You would try to ride this buzz wave and bootstrap yourself up to a pretty wide release. And people who know how to do it can do it. You have to have a good product because that whole thing survives on word of mouth, and bad word of mouth platform releases killed. Which is why, and this is another thing, the economics have changed, and since the economics changed, the content changes. Another reason that movies are so bad, they're just badly written, is because the system is set up now for a film to make its money back on the first weekend, at least its cost. That's the idea. And so once you began to have these, instead of opening on 200 screens or something, when a film opened on 3,000 or 4,000, 5,000 screens across America on the same day, that film could basically be just blank leader. It could just be the boop boop for 90 minutes. And by the time people found out what a toad this was, it was too late. They already had their money. And this is what we see all the time. They make these movies, they hype the hell out of them, they do incredible great trailers and promotional campaigns. You get yourself all hot and bothered to see it. And if you don't go during the first day or two, sooner or later you hear from your friends who say, good God, man, save yourself the money, don't do it. But the fact that you can make that much money on an opening weekend means that people make movies that are just junk because they can get away with it. So to answer your question, yes, it would be possible to make a film and then go out, the same production company, go out and four-wall it. I would not be the owner of the theater, but I would be able to connect the revenues from American audiences with the people that made the movie. And if we had not done this, much mischief could have been avoided. Okay, back to Facebook. Let's see what we got here.